nexus of conspiracy theory and the paranormal meet. And now, we join the show already in progress with your hosts, Adam and Seraphiel.
Let's just get into it, man. I mean, I'm really excited to have you. Welcome to Conspirinormal, guys. You know, as always, it's Adam. Seraphiel is here.
Yeah.
And I'm excited about this guest that we got coming on, Jake Richards.
I think we've already started.
Yeah, we've already started. I'm pretty amazed. He wrote a book called Backwoods Witchcraft. And to be honest, man, I've been getting into a lot of this lately. Just recently, I met, I don't know if you're familiar with him, Jack Montgomery. He lives up in Bowling Green, Kentucky. And he wrote a book called American Shamans about like powwow, and he's mostly steeped in the powwow tradition from like South Carolina. And this is something that I've been getting into a lot because of our good friend Timothy Renner, who we've talked to a lot up in Pennsylvania. And he's talked about powwow on the show. And I've had a couple other people that have come on, Ren Collier, and he suggested, and also a good friend of mine named Heather, she suggested you as well. So I was like, well, I got to get this guy on. So welcome to Conspirinormal, Jake.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. It's great to have you. One of the things I always ask every guest is how you got into this. But with you, it's almost kind of like you've always been into this. Like this is really, you've grown up in this essentially. So let's kind of just talk about your journey into rediscovering the backwoods magic. And, you know, this is personal, I think, for us too, being Tennesseans. I mean, we're not that far away from you. And I'm from East Tennessee originally. Yeah,
growing up, there wasn't really, I never really put a question to it. So I kind of just always assumed that, other people put, baby powder on the doorsteps, or, like Nana, prayed with her eyes open. Except when I was really, real young, Mama had, explained a lot of it to me. So she just told me, the baby powder kept bugs away, or, anything like that. Except as I got older, I noticed that I kept seeing bugs in the house, like spiders, ants, the regular things. And everybody else that I'd ever met, prayed with their eyes closed. So that's when I started, questioning it a little bit more. And I had always known that, Papa could, stop blood with a Bible verse, Ezekiel, it's either 16:6 or 6:16. I get it mixed up. He could take fever out with an egg. He could buy off warts. And I just, thought that was, normal stuff. But as I started, studying it, into it more, starting basically with like other cultures, like in Europe and places like that, I started seeing a lot of similarities. So then that's kind of what led me down the rabbit hole into, bringing it home.
So you began to kind of practice all this kind of, I guess, lack of a better word, this backwoods witchcraft.
Yeah, essentially, I mainly was, just studying it or whatever, but then I actually took up the practice after my grandfather passed away.
Okay.
Because he was essentially, one of the last ones in the family. And then it kind of pushed me further when, my other elders started passing away or simply forgetting, like my grandmother with dementia. So I just, essentially wanted to preserve it because as much as it's, other people's stories, it's, first and foremost, my story to me.
Sure. So let's talk about just like, what is that like to be someone that does this? I mean, do you get people that come to you a lot now? And I mean, is it kind of like you're, for lack of a better word, kind of like a shaman of the community?
Well, I think it's a little bit more than that, because with this work, you're a lot of things to a lot of people.
Sure.
In some aspects, you're a neighbor, you're a friend, you're a relative. Some other aspects, you're a priest or a counselor or any of the above. Since the book's come out, I haven't really, seen a change in like people coming to me or anything like that. So it's kind of been, business as usual.
Yeah.
But yeah, essentially, it simply depends on exactly what the person's needing. Whether they're needing guidance, help, anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Then I don't know, it just like comes naturally with the work, I guess.
So what would be a good example if someone comes to you? Like, what's kind of a personal story that you can kind of tell? Somebody comes to you with a need, and then you do some kind of working, and then what is the result of that?
Well, there was this one woman. She came to me. She's actually been a client of mine for a couple of years, and she came to me for an egg cleansing as well as a few other readings.
Okay.
And just to identify exactly what her problem was, because she had a bad breakup with an ex of I think it was 4 or 6 years, and then ever since then her luck and love has been down in the dirt, and then soon after that it started spreading to other aspects of her life, like her job, her finances, her family, her friends, and she just became real reclusive to herself. So I did readings with the cards, counted the seeds, did tea leaf reading for her, and all of them basically point to the same thing, that it was what most people call the evil eye, resulting from an ex-lover. So we did some cleansing, some purifying, and then after that her life's been just great, because as soon as she walked in, she was just down. I mean, she was just exhausted, tired, but ever since then she's done nothing but grow. So it's really good to see that change actually take effect in someone's life. And like my grandmother always taught me, the person has to have faith, because just like in the Bible, when Jesus healed the blind man, he asked the blind man, "Do you believe that I can do this?" And the blind man said, "Yea, Lord, I do." And then Jesus said something along the lines of, "Then so shall you be healed according unto you," or something of that nature. Basically saying, by your degree of belief or your degree of faith, that is the same degree you will be healed. So doing this work, there's a lot of interplay in the actual essence of humanity, because although times have changed, the people haven't. We still need money, we still need to survive, we still need companionship, we still need protection from evil spirits, enemies, anything of that sort.
Right. So this lady, she had just like a visible change in her life. So she went through this ritual, and then she was able to kind of cleanse this out of her life, and then all of a sudden she was able to move on.
Exactly.
Huh. And when you say cards, you're not actually talking about tarot cards. As I understand it, these are normal playing cards.
Yeah, I read with playing cards like my mother taught me.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I had no idea that was even a thing when you wrote that in the book. What's some of the rules of that, of using the cards? Like, just like, and all this stuff that you list in this book, it's interesting to me because there's so many rules, and you have to do this thing at this particular amount of time in this particular way. It's just fascinating, all these interesting aspects of this. But what's some of the rules about the playing cards? Like, because there's some really specific things that you have to do with these cards.
Well, there's specific things that my mother taught me. Is I never play normal games with the deck that I read with, and I never read with a deck of cards that has been used in games. I keep those separated. And anytime that I go to read cards for a stranger, I have to use a separate deck than the one that I use for friends or family. Because especially with strangers, you don't know what they're basically carrying around with them in their life. So you don't want that, basically hopping over onto you. So that's why I keep, that deck separate from those of friends and relatives. And my mother taught me to not necessarily read the cards in a linear order. More so, she taught me to pay attention to the cards that popped in my eyesight first. So I could pull a couple of pairs like an aces, a sevens, a jacks. But the most prominent would be the one that spirit makes pop first. So whether it's like two queens identifying a woman, or a pair of twos, like the two of clubs and the two of spades, that would represent some sort of transaction or meeting gone wrong, depending on which card's on top, of course. So it's really complicated to put into words.
Yeah, you do a whole list in the book of what each card means and what it is. It's interesting to me how there is that kind of parallel with the tarot. I mean, tarot was of course used as a game at one point too.
Yeah, well, at the time, playing cards were, all that the majority of people had.
Yeah.
And there were tons of, old books that were sold in like pharmacies and, the backs of different trade shops, that told you how to, interpret your dreams or read playing cards or, anything of that sort, especially like the dream number, lottery number books or something like that, which tells you how to win the lottery based on what numbers you see in your dream.
Yeah.
So mostly they were marketed and spoke most to, the poorest communities, those who didn't really have much to do with, and kind of gave them essentially like a leverage in life.
Let's talk a little bit about, because you do a good job, I think, in the book, about the natural environment and how that kind of affects the folklore and kind of the magical workings that you do there in Appalachia.
Oh yeah, definitely, because in southern Appalachia, the region's always had a particular, I wouldn't say affinity or anything like that, more so like a working relationship with nature. And I originally thought about that when I was driving over the mountains one day. I think we were going to Irwin or Unicoi or somewhere like that. But to me, it's like the mountain roads are like a symbol of the mountaineer's relationship with, the region in Appalachia. Because while the mountain itself cannot be tamed, man still cannot be stopped from crossing the mountains.
Yeah.
So it's like man cannot tame the mountain, but the mountain cannot tame the mountaineer either. So it's kind of like a balanced working relationship. Now, in regards to, actual practice, there were a lot of things, animal, insect, or otherwise, that were used in some works, what are they called? Most people know them as like the little roly-poly bugs or pill bugs.
Right, right.
Some people would hang their colic. They had to be alive, and then as they died in the little pouch, they would essentially take the colic away with them. Or as the pill bug died, so did the colic die off. And then a lot of things are, now endangered, just like the hellbender salamander, because that was often used in, certain works, especially cursing works, where, it called for powdered puppies, is what they call them, or mud puppies. But those are, now endangered and extremely rare. They used minnows, trout. I haven't heard any of using bluegill. But the majority of it uses the actual, herbs and plants that were available to us, like bloodroot, ginseng, golden seal, yarrow, goldenrod, and, most things like that, based off of the doctrine of signatures, which is a belief that in creating the world, God left an imprint on every single thing as to its use. So, like, heart-shaped leaves could, help with, heart disorders or love. Kidney beans could help with kidney disorders and luck. ciphering out the bad luck from the good luck.
So they had like a symbolic function.
Yeah, basically in Appalachia, well, most of Southern American folk magic, the ingredients that are used, a symbolic meaning behind them can always be found, whether it's how the herb grows, what the herb's roots look like, what the animal's behavior is. All of it can be, somehow tied or related to the particular work or charm that it's been included in. Like some charms, especially those of strength or protection, sometimes included hair from a woman's head, just any woman. And that was apparently based on the belief, which my papa also subscribed to, that the woman was the strongest thing in nature because, essentially she could bleed for 7 days and not die. So that's kind of used to, conjure some of that strength, especially in like protection, usually in protection from like, natural disasters like flood or rain or snow or anything like that.
Also, too, you talk about the history and that kind of intermixing of people and the ideas and the superstitions that kind of get carried down from these different people and how that has become this kind of mishmash of beliefs. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, when all the immigrants came over, they were essentially just as poor as us from the get-go. Just like the Scots-Irish, they, came here looking for, a better homeland, and they just, kind of kept that mentality. Basically, all of the, early immigrants that settled in Appalachia had that mentality of, independence and stubbornness about them, regardless of, nationality, whether they were Irish, Italian, German. And that just kind of like all melded together into like one unified spirit of independence, which has, that's affected our religion and way of life, the way we cook, the way we, run our lives, whether it's, taking care of animals or anything like that, simply, with the resources that we have at hand. Which is one of the primary reasons that a lot of, small town communities that really need the help, kind of refuse the help, not simply based on, that spirit of independence, but also based on the track record of, outside corporations trying to help them. Because, they'll come in and they'll give good jobs, they'll make mines, they'll make the economy better, and then out of nowhere they just up and leave. Right. And everybody's just, left with the ruins of it.
Yeah, that's a big problem, especially in Appalachia.
Yeah, so there's always been this, I wouldn't say cult mindset, but like a tight-knit communal mindset, where you would, rather trust your neighbor who his granddad was born and raised here, his father was born and raised here, he was born and raised here, and we essentially identify, region and place with our character and identity as well. A lot of people here aren't as trustful of people who are like from, like Arizona or California or any place like that. Simply because they're different. Their mannerisms are different, and they basically get treated like the corporations. Like with mistrust, you can't really know what to expect with them, as you can your neighbor or someone down the road.
Yeah, that's true.
So all that together,
tight-knit communities.
Yeah, and even when we had, I think I mentioned in the book that we didn't start getting actual medical doctors until the early 1900s, but I was wrong about that. It was the early 1800s, where a lot of doctors started coming in, whether it was Blount County, Washington County, Carter County. But even then, with all the handful of medical professionals in every town or so, there was still a lot of people who didn't trust the Western medicine because it was fairly new. And we're people of habit, and we like to stick with the things that we know work. So a lot of the people continued with their herbs and their tonics and whatnot, so much so that there was a lot of what they call herb men or yarb doctors who would, sell their supplements or anything like that. And because of the, the large mistrust in Appalachia, some doctors actually, look to make money on that by, publishing self-help medical books. Like John C. Gunn's Domestic Medicine, which basically tells you, how to take care of your body until a physician is absolutely necessary. And those were, widespread just about in every household, along with it's a book called The Cherokee Physician or The Indian's Guide to Health. And then locally there was a book called The Wright Family Practice, because Isaac Wright the Third, I think, he was one of the best doctors, around here. And still today, my mother will trust any doctor or physician whose last name is Wright, simply because of that legacy that the family left behind.
So it sounds like because of the isolation and the insular nature of the Appalachian people, like you described, this is what actually led to the preservation of all this stuff.
Oh, definitely, because, aside from physicians and, the ever so often outsider help for companies or anything like that coming in, we had to rely on ourselves, whether it was medically, physically, spiritually. There were a lot of people or communities who had to guide their own spirituality because they didn't really have churches or congregations, because they relied on circuit riders who came in, every couple months or so to, do baptisms, marriages, burials, or whatnot. And, aside from the physicians and the large mistrust in the new beginnings of Western medicine, all of it kind of really stuck to home.
Yeah.
It didn't really, step off the front porch, basically.
Well, aside from some of the ritual kind of magical things being preserved, how would you describe the difference in religion of the region? Because you talk about, I guess, the Bible being more than a book and it being used as well. And what makes Appalachian religion different than, say, Christianity and most of the rest of the United States, how it developed?
Well, there were certain communities who kind of developed the, what do you call it? I don't want to call them by the bad name. Then I always called them holy rollers, but I can't remember what their actual denomination's called.
Charismatic,
kind of
more.
Yeah. Theirs is, a little bit more lenient and esoteric, so to speak, because they, actually, test their faith, basically. Whereas, other churches and congregations simply brought that same spirit of independence in and, basically made a relationship with God on their own, which is also one of the reasons why Catholicism, never really took hold here, because there has to be a middleman, basically.
Right.
And because of that close relationship that most individuals built with God, there hasn't always been like a large need to profess in public or, anything like that, like they, protest and do all sorts of stuff now. But, there were, certain churches way back in the day where, they stuck, hard fast with the rules that the Bible gave. Just like the story of my grandmother, Myra Tipton, where she was basically kicked out of the Baptist church because she was wearing a man's hat. There were an interesting story. Yeah. Basically it all depended, because just, as varied as the people are, everything else is going to be varied, whether it's the way we cook a certain dish, the way we pray, mannerisms, manners, anything like that.
Well, this leads into a discussion, since we're talking about religion, and I was looking at some of the reviews for your book, and there was one person that had a problem, and I guess that they were looking for like some really hardcore esoteric grimoire or something when they bought your book, but they were just really offended by how many Bible verses there are in it. But it's interesting to me, and this came up also in like when I talked to Jack Montgomery not that long ago, just how the Bible is instrumental in this belief system, this system of magic, this kind of root work as well. That it's just the Bible is almost like a divining tool. Very important, and it's important in powwow too. The powwow is based a lot, and it has a lot of biblical. It talks a lot about the Bible, very steeped in Christianity.
Yeah, I'm not sure what they were looking for with the book. I was really confused because it's kind of posted everywhere in the advertisement.
Right. So you're familiar with that review? Then I'm talking about, huh?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Bible is extremely instrumental because, a lot of the population back in the day, they were illiterate. So it was very powerful to them that they were illiterate, but they could understand, the literal word of God. So it kind of took a strong foothold in the, the community, the society, and the culture. And, a lot of taboos, sprung around the Bible, like you're never supposed to put it on the floor. A lot of people believe that it will survive any natural disaster. And it was even marketed like little pocket Bibles were marketed back in the day to soldiers, going into World War II, based on the belief that worn in the heart pocket, it would stop any bullet. So yeah, the Bible itself has, become many things in the southern region of America, not just Appalachia. It's become a charm, a spell book of sorts. But also, it contains family history because back in the day, that was, the majority of books available was the Bible.
Right.
So the Bible was used to contain, and is still used to contain, like birth certificates, death certificates, Social Security numbers, other important papers and documentations that the family needs. And it also used to be the only record of, births, marriages, or deaths, especially in small knit communities where, there wasn't an office to issue, birth certificates or death certificates or anything like that, which is, fairly apparent because there was a lot of confusion that came about because of that, because of the little records that people had of people. Like one of my grandmothers, I think on my father's grandmother's side, she died in 1932, but a picture that I found through Ancestry.com, the back of it is noted as 1939, even though her death certificate says, 1932. So while it could, possibly lead to, misinformation like that, it was still, a stronghold in the community. It was a record keeper. It contained the history of a family and sometimes even the history of the whole community.
Right, but what are some of the magical workings that are used with it? And
or some particular verses?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you that this is a very new thing to me in some ways. I was married for a long time to a Brazilian woman, right? And she kind of was in this like the evangelical kind of charismatic tradition down in Brazil. Okay. Mm-hmm. And sometimes she would pick up the Bible, just randomly open it to something, to a word, to like a page, and I would ask her, what are you doing? Like, how do you read the Bible? And she would tell me, I read it, I just opened it to a random page, and what I read is what God's trying to tell me. And I was like, well, that's like using it as a divining tool, because here I am at this point, I'm very kind of staunch, kind of Christian, very much like, the word is the word. You don't use it as a divining tool.
Right.
You don't do that. That's not, that's of the devil or whatever, back when I was in that phase of my life. And now I'm kind of look at it and just like, that seems to be what a lot of people have done throughout history, is essentially use it as a divining tool. So like, to me, this is just an interesting concept of where, it's like, it is not that people take the Bible seriously, obviously, but it's a tool just like any other tool.
Yeah. So yeah, the Bible itself can be used in a lot of works. My papa and nana used to always keep, like pictures or items from me and the other grandkids at certain verses like Psalms 23 or, other verses that talk about, I can't remember what verse it is. I think it's in the book of Matthew,
Okay.
where, Jesus refers to the little children as the key to the kingdom of heaven, and that you shouldn't rebuke them or, anything like that. So you can, put the photo of a person at a certain verse to either heal them, protect them, or even, like curse them if you put their photo, facing the verse upside down. The Bible is sometimes used in like measuring rites, which I explain in the book, which is like being the essence, or like measuring like an arm or a leg that's afflicted with something to help heal it. It can protect from nightmares if it's placed under the bed. You can open the Bible to the chapter of Matthew where Jesus is born for during labor if a woman's giving birth, and you would place it depending on exactly what the risk is. Whether the child is at risk, you would lay the Bible open on the stomach. If the mother is at risk, you would lay it open on her chest.
Interesting.
So the use of the Bible itself as with divination tool, ingredient, or simply a pure source of power, varies greatly, simply based on the way the Spirit is directing you. Because my grandmother does the bibliomancy with the Bible. She'll just open it at a certain part after asking a question.
Yeah.
And she always taught me that if you open it to one of the either one of the parts, written in red where Jesus is speaking, then, whatever you want, it shall come to pass. Or if you open it to a verse that, starts with, and it came to pass, then that's, confirmation that, it will come true or it will happen. Even with just that one simple practice, there's hundreds of different, variations in the South with how you can do divination by the Bible. Some people say you got to take it to a crossroads and let the wind blow the pages until it stops. Some say you're supposed to open the Bible and read the verse that is above your right thumb or above your left thumb, or you're supposed to close your eyes and move your finger in a circle and count to 3, 7, 19, and then open your eyes on whatever finger whatever verse your finger's on. Then that's the answer. So you can see there's a lot of variations. Simply by looking at one simple thing that so many people have done, that there's so many variations on. There's just a lot to it. More than just superstitions or tall tales. There's actual systems and theories and methods behind all of it.
Yeah, there's this particular specificness about a lot of these rituals, not just to deal with the Bible. It's like there was one that you talk about in the book where you just like you got to hold your toe or something above your head or something like that. It was just something really just awfully specific that you have to do. And then, as you mentioned too, there's these weird numbers. There's a lot of numerology stuff going on with this.
Yeah, numerology was, I guess they wouldn't call it numerology, but it is the numerology. The number 3 would represent, the Holy Spirit.
Right. 5
for the 5 wounds of Christ. Growing up, I was always told that 7 was God's lucky number.
Mm-hmm.
Never, found anything about that, but Mom always just told me that was God's lucky number. And I'd always sit there and question myself, like, why does God need a lucky number? He's God.
Yeah. Right.
And then, like, the number 9 features a lot in some of the works and formulas. As far as I can tell, because 9 relates to a lot of things in the Bible, like the 9 lepers that Jesus healed. Jesus died in the 9th hour, so it kind of means, completion. It is done. And
it's 3 times 3.
I think in the book of,
right.
That's true. And I think in the book of Acts, it also mentions that the 9th hour is the hour of prayer.
Fascinating stuff. I really, truly, and I think just a lot of this stuff just develops slowly over time. It's just something that comes from the old country, and it just no one really knows where it comes from. But it's just passed down through this oral tradition.
Exactly. And I mean, you can, look at the folk traditions of like Italy or Germany or Ireland or Britain and see a lot of similarities when comparing it to, Appalachian folk magic or the practices done in the Ozarks. And while they are similar, I still believe that they are, entirely distinct. Because, whereas, the European, roots may have created the Appalachian and the Ozark traditions, but they're still, to me, entirely different entities, simply because they are shaped by the communities, the societal structures, and just the environment, like I explained in the book.
So, ancestor veneration. This idea that you have this connection to your ancestors. And I think that you do a whole chapter about this. And I think that this is very important, of just knowing where you come from, essentially, and the idea of veneration.
Yeah, it is very important, which I was always taught that it was important first and foremost in a family sense, because I was raised to respect my elders, living or dead, because there is, still a strong belief that the dead can have a particular effect on the living, and whether that's good or bad, depends highly on your actions. And back in the day when, this work was developing, we didn't have these community graveyards. We had family cemeteries that, were essentially at our front door. So if you, disrespected one of your ancestors or, made them upset or neglected them in any way, you would have a quick haunting on your hands. But over time, the different protections and precautions that, it comes when speaking to the dead or being around the dead has changed since, communal cemeteries, and now, there's people who hold their breath when going past it, or they cross their fingers, or they refuse to look in the mirrors until they've passed 3 crossroads. There's just a lot of new superstitions that have grown up around ancestor veneration and the simple recognition of, the moving dead, basically, that have, just sprung up. Now, in regards to ancestor veneration, as far as I've seen, just about every person, or, every person I've ever met has, some sort of shrine or something of that sort, already set up in their home without putting a second thought to it. Whether it's a simple wall dedicated to them, a dresser, a bookshelf, it just contains all of the memorabilia and photographs of the dead. Now, with my family, we were always taught that you should never, include photos with the living. Otherwise, you or the dead could pine away for each other, and you could also be brought down to the grave.
That's creepy.
Yeah, and it's for that reason that, especially like newborn babies, if they were born and died soon after, or if they were simply stillborn, they were always buried face down. So the baby itself wouldn't pine away for the parents, and then the parents would waste away and die.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Never heard that before.
So while they are still our family and our relatives, because they're in a different realm. They are coded. They are wearing a different robe, basically, and with that comes different behaviors and mannerisms, and different precautions and vulnerabilities. So I always wear a hat or a head covering or something like that when I ever go into the graveyard to prevent anything or anyone from hopping on my back, so to speak, and following me home. And even when dealing with your own ancestors, if you do decide to venerate your ancestors, you do have to remember that there are a lot of times going to be ancestors who have not changed their ways. So you could be like a person of color, but one of your ancestors was a Union soldier. So calling them up and trying to venerate them would probably not be a good idea. because there's some cemetery, I think it's over in Sevierville, where it's nothing but Union soldiers, and it's always, recommended to, people of color, don't go there, that they'll haunt you, because, even just because they're dead doesn't mean they've changed their ways.
Do you mean like Confederate soldiers?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah,
okay.
Confederate soldiers, not Union soldiers.
Yeah.
It's been a long day.
I got you.
Yeah.
I got you. Well, that makes sense. Yeah. So just these. That's interesting. I've never heard that. Do you know where that cemetery is?
I think it's in Sevierville, or near Sevierville.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
Yeah, there could be something to all that as well, because East Tennessee was pretty unionist.
It's been through a lot.
Yeah.
That's the only way to sum it up. It's been through a lot.
East Tennessee could have gone the way of West Virginia. We could have been, talking to each other in two different states right now. That's how serious it could have been. So, there was a lot of Union sympathy in East Tennessee. So, I wonder if there's just like some memory that just still pervades in the people and their attitudes from that time period, or that time period of struggle.
Yeah, definitely. Especially during like the Civil War, there was, I know here in Jonesboro, I can't remember his first name, but it was some guy named Everett. He ran a newsletter or a newspaper or something like that. It was called the Emancipator, and it was one of the first, one of the first things
the abolitionists
created to, abolitionists, against slavery, and during further research, I found that there were some schools in Knoxville and Johnson City, and even in Jonesboro, not Knoxville, Kingsport, where they actually were teaching people of color how to read and everything like that back in sometime in the 1800s, before the Emancipation Act occurred. So with that spirit of independence, there's always been that, just like, I don't know how to explain it, like live and let live. So there was a lot of objection to slavery in East Tennessee.
Oh yeah, because East Tennessee didn't have any of the huge plantations.
Yeah,
it wasn't like here in Nashville, where we have Carton Plantation and a few others that were in this area. The Hermitage is not too far. That was a plantation too. Middle and West were very much more the slavery areas, but when you go into the hills, into the Appalachians, there's no real slavery in East Tennessee.
Yeah, and just about every old house in and around downtown Jonesboro, so I've heard, have like secret tunnels and passageways that were used during the Underground Railroad to help escaping slaves.
Yeah, I can believe it. Just because there was so much sympathy for the Union cause, and the irony of it was that the East was the last to fall. Like most of Tennessee fell to the Union pretty quickly, but the East, it took a couple more years.
Yeah.
And even growing up in Chattanooga, there's an area there where the Union sympathizers blew up bridges and such, and to keep the Confederate soldiers from getting on their way. And of course, you got the general and all that. I showed Sefriel that when we were down. Well, that's North Georgia, but let's talk a little bit about some of the rights that you talk about in the book. And I found these particularly interesting, kind of like the transference rights and the transference of disease, and what this means, and also what is a power doctor?
Power doctor down here is basically like a corruption of the powwow doctors.
Okay.
So those were, primarily the ones who, would come and, cure, unnatural illnesses, or, simply do faith healing in general. So again, that could be, like a powwow doctor who also utilized, charms and amulets, but it could have also been, a power doctor who, solely believed in the word of God and rebuked all of that stuff.
Okay. and some of these rites that the transference rites and the measuring rites, and just describe some of these.
Well, I kind of, basically organize them that way because they are, extremely common, especially in the curing and diagnosis of disease in Southern Appalachia, as well as, the South in general. So this is another rabbit hole. So back in the day, a lot of people, especially, even with the other, like those self-help books that were being published, they believed that, disease originated in a number of ways, whether it was evil spirits, witchcraft, bad air, like whether that's night air during a certain season or during a certain phase of the moon could make you sick, or, odors and smells from like decaying animals, decaying vegetation or sewers, even such small things as drastic changes in temperature. So if you go from, being in a house that's like 75 degrees and then you go outside and it's 13 degrees outside, that can change the imbalances or the, what are they called? Humoral fluxes in the body. It was kind of like the based on the same medical philosophy that the Greeks used.
Okay.
Basically, like, so there was phlegm, black bile, yellow bile, and blood. And once all of these were in balance, then you were in perfect health. But if one of these, fluctuated or got too high or got too low, you could, get pneumonia, you could get migraines, you could get high blood pressure, low blood pressure, bad blood, sweet blood, all, number of different things.
They call that the humors?
Yeah, it's like the humorous philosophy or something like that. Yeah. I can't remember who, like in what Greek philosopher came up with it.
That was a huge concept in the Middle Ages, the idea of the humors and the humors that affect the body. And
yeah, and, based on that belief, there were a lot of, what we consider now primitive practices, such as cupping or bloodletting or, anything like that. But even with all of these, advances coming in on, from Western medicine, again, we're creatures of habit. So, our minds couldn't really be swayed as to, it's just, this other thing that's causing it, not an evil spirit. So a lot of times, diseases were identified as, demons or evil spirits of that disease who had to be, scared out, purged out, exorcised out, or simply transferred, meaning that it could be transferred from one person to another, or one person to an animal, or even one person to an inanimate object, such as like a door frame or a tree. So like if you got your, and there was also the connection that two things that come in contact stay in contact. So like if you got cut or stabbed by a nail, you would have to, grease the nail and keep it clean and keep it somewhere where it can stay dry, because there was a belief that if it rusted and, started, getting old, then the wound would, take longer to heal and possibly fester and become infected, which at the time could, be life-threatening.
Oh, yeah.
And even when fishing, if you, got a fishing hook stuck in your finger, you were immediately supposed to dry all of the blood off of it and stick it into a piece of wood, because the wood was supposed to, keep it dry and clean.
So you would transfer your pain to an object, and sometimes you would transfer to another person. Is that another aspect of this?
Yeah, such as with taking warts off. They would take warts off with by taking up the same number of stones as warts that you had, and they would touch each stone to the warts 3 times each, and then they would put them in a bag and leave them at a crossroads. And the next person to come by and pick up that bag would then get the warts, and the warts would leave you and go to them.
What is it with the crossroads?
Huh?
Well, I was going to ask you what it is with the crossroads. What did you say about the Cherokee?
The Cherokee also utilized the same form whenever somebody became sick, especially after like a death in the family or coming back from war. it was believed that spirits of illness were around them, and they needed to be cleansed and purged before they could be, integrated back into society. So, the priest or the medicine men would take them to the river, and they would give them purgative herbs to, essentially vomit up and cleanse their system. And at the same time, the medicine man would be, speaking with the river, or who they called the long man, praying him to take the disease or the illness away to a people far away. Because the Cherokee, realized that nothing can be created nor destroyed, it simply moved from one place to another. So they would, pray for that disease to go to another people, to another tribe. And it would essentially, get passed around like hot potato.
Yeah, we don't want it. We don't want it here. What is it with the crossroads? This comes up again and again. And of course, when I think of the crossroads, I think of, Robert Johnson, the blues man, the deal with the devil, these type of things that are more like in the Mid-South, mythology and folklore, and the black dogs.
Oh, yeah, we have way too many stories about the devil here.
Yeah,
way
sure.
too many.
Yeah.
As far as I can tell, it's both. It's kind of like equal as to European belief as well as African belief, and that the crossroads are a place between, whether it's a place between the living and the dead, or health and sickness, or anything like that. And it became basically a portal to selling your soul, or meeting the devil and making a trade for some kind of talent, whether it was musical, writing, anything of that nature.
How is the devil depicted sometimes in Appalachia?
Well, that's actually a weird phenomenon in Appalachia, because it simply depends on the community and the history behind them. Because some people, based on the superstitions and stuff that they have about the devil, he's no longer, the father of lies or the king of evil that the Bible portrays him as, but simply a trickster spirit, and especially a spirit that can be out-tricked, just like in, all of the southern Appalachian Jacktail.
Devil went down to Georgia.
Yeah. Or, just the story about the creation of the jack-o'-lantern, which basically states that, Jack was like a mean old drunk, and he was, walking home one night, and he saw I guess he thought it was like a homeless man, and he invited him to, come in and, get his belly full and go to sleep. And then that's when, he realized it was the devil come to take his soul. So then he would bargain with the devil, such as, what was one part of the story? Something like, you can't take my soul until after I've eaten this whole bushel of apples. So him and the devil climb up in the apple tree together, and Jack's eating the bushels or whatnot. And then when the devil's not looking, Jack jumps down and, takes out his pocket knife, and he carves a cross into the tree, basically making it to where the devil is stuck. And he tells the devil that he won't let him go until the devil gives him 10 more years. Well, he keeps doing that, tricking him and getting him stuck to where he can't, go nowhere until, Jack actually dies. And then once he dies, he's denied at the gates of heaven for obvious reasons. But then when he gets to the gates of hell, he's also denied by the devil. So he was basically cursed to, wander the earth for eternity, because, there was nowhere else to go. But the devil had pity on him and threw him one of the hot coals from hell's burning fire. And so Jack took that coal, and he carved out a turnip, and he put the coal in the turnip. And that's the turnip that he uses now to, guide his way for eternity.
There's an interesting concepts there, and it goes along with the crossroads of just the idea of liminality, the space in between. Mm-hmm. And the character in that story ends up in this space between heaven and hell, a liminal space where supernatural things abound in liminal spaces.
I think most of the the bad ideas surrounding the crossroads comes from the European beliefs of selling your soul to the devil at the crossroads, as well as the the remaining idea that it was only criminals and thieves and people who didn't have no one who were actually buried at the crossroads.
Yeah.
So I think the use of today's crossroads is kind of like a remnant belief from using the, essentially the graveyard of the damned and the sinners, whose essential gatekeeper was also the devil himself.
Let's talk about some of the spirits that you talk about, and you talk about the little people in the book. There's some interesting stories about the little people, because I don't know if you're familiar with the missing 411 material, the David Paulides stuff, but some of it really reflects it. Not being last in line or not looking behind and being taken by the little people. There's a lot of this in Cherokee folklore. One that struck me in the book was the Forever Boy.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of these concepts that Cherokee had about the little people.
Well, it's kind of like a paradox, because just like with one of the little people that I talked about, Dejata, he's in the stories it's said that mothers used to threaten their children with Dejata's going to get you if you don't be quiet, and then that would kind of offend the spirit, and he would send disease on the parents or the child. So it's kind of like a paradox whether, that was acceptable, or like, when did that start? When was it not acceptable? And then there's other stories. I believe it's that one book about the Trail of Tears. I think I still have it. I might have given it away. Where it's, that the writer or the author identifies that their mother used to speak with the little people when she was young, and that the little people would carry you away to the nightlands when you passed away or died. So their roles in Cherokee culture, kind of changed and swift from, trickster spirits to helpers and healers to, actually little tiny grim reapers.
Little tiny grim reapers.
Little tiny grim reapers.
Yeah. There's a lot of similarity to fairy lore in some of that Cherokee mythology that I think is very interesting.
Yeah, it is. Just like modern Appalachia, it's very varied and colorful in its mythology and stories and practice.
Yeah. Are you familiar with that David Paulides and the missing 411 stuff, and about people going missing in the national parks, especially like in the Great Smoky Mountains? There's a lot of cases there that are just odd.
Yeah, I think I've read a book on it, specifically about the Great Smoky Mountains, but I can't. That was years ago. That's all I've really looked into that.
Yeah, it's it makes you really wonder about some of this mythology and whether like the Cherokees experience this type of thing themselves and these encounters with these beings and the other. You also talk about in the spirits section about Luna moths and dogs and some of the symbology associated with them.
Yeah, just like with that, close relationship with nature and the relationship with God, nature kind of became the natural, canvas for which the spirits speak from. So Luna moth has always been, regarded as a sacred animal, with the belief that it, carries messages from the dead. And the same was with the Cherokee people as well, especially with like albino animals, like an albino deer. They identified the albino deer as Little Deer, or who was the chief of the deer clan, all of the deer in the forest, as well as, like white dogs, which kind of, parallels with the European superstitions about black dogs and, devil dogs haunting graves, or I think it's called the Grim, where it was like the first dog buried was the guardian of the cemetery or the graveyard.
Okay.
So yeah, just like with the beliefs surrounding our ancestors and the dead, animals and nature kind of had that same interplay as being, whether messages or signs or omens from the other side.
And the Luna moths.
Yeah, just like the Luna moths being, messages from the dead.
And they have a specific, so they're more, there's this association with the dead. That both deer, dogs, Luna moths, they have this association.
Yeah, well, the black dogs more specifically, have an association with death itself.
Yeah.
Because there's always a superstition that if you see a white phantom dog or a black dog, who's just sitting in the yard looking at the house and it won't leave, it's because it's waiting for its owner, death to arrive.
Ooh.
Yeah,
do anybody know?
Have any folklore always gives me chills.
Have anybody ever had any experience like that? Seen the dog out there waiting?
Yeah. This actually just happened a couple of months ago.
Really?
One of my mother's neighbors lives like down the street, like 6 or 7 houses. She was walking her dog, who so happened to be white, and it somehow got off of its leash and ran straight up because the apartments or housing that my mother lives in, it's 2 apartments per building. It's essentially government housing. So it ran up to one of the neighbor's doorsteps and it would not move. She tried for about 30 minutes to get that dog off of the person's porch, and then I want to say it was 2 weeks, maybe a month later. There was an ambulance outside, and I don't know if they ever passed or whatever, because a lot of the old people out there don't really come outside. So we haven't seen the old woman, so we're not sure what happened, if that was the reacting of one of those superstitions or not.
So it doesn't necessarily have to be like this spectral dog. It can be like a real dog, like a familiar dog, but you'll just for some reason go stand on somebody's doorstep and look at them.
Yeah, basically.
Huh. What about owls? Is there anything with owls?
The only thing that I've ever found about owls, that one is, again, a paradox, because one old, love potion or whatever is made using owl feathers, whereas generally owls are regarded as an omen of death. So if an owl was, sitting on top of the house hooting, they would, take all of their shoes off and turn them inside out, take 2 pieces of iron and cross them in the fire or, the fireplace or anything like that to chase the owl away and get it to stop hooting. And then there was one which was supposed to break the bird's neck. I think it was tying a knot in the corner of your apron or something of that nature. I can't remember exactly what was supposed to be done, but it was supposed to break the bird's neck.
Haints. Now, I've heard this word probably most of my life. What is a haint? Because I think it has I've always thought it came from the word haunt, but I think that it's a little, the etymology is a little different.
Yeah, so in Appalachia, haint can, be anything from, just a simple vengeful spirit, like an ancestral spirit, an ancestor who, they didn't really live a good life, but they are affecting you in physical manners, whether conscious or unconscious, cautious. Or it could simply be, demons, the little folk, or, simply a disease spirit that's, essentially haunting you in some form or manner.
Are there ways to get rid of them? And isn't there something about like the blue windows or like the blue window panes to keep them away?
Yes, the blue is supposed to conjure up, in the spirit's mind, recollections of the sky during the daytime, or even of the oceans or running water, because evil spirits can't cross running water, and their reign isn't necessarily in the daytime, more so at the nighttime, because that's when the conditions for them to appear and act are better than it is in the daytime. So that's why a lot of people would paint their doors or their porches or just the front porch ceiling paint blue to help keep them out and deter them. Now, of course, it was never 100% preventive, because nothing is. But, if a haint got in, then depending on the actual circumstance, whether it is attached to a person or it's attached to an item that was brought into the house, or, if it's simply, just a demon of sorts, there's different things that can be done to, get rid of it, again, based on exactly what it is. So, you could take it like a cleansing bath. Some people would go to like the actual altars in the churches and pray for a certain number of days. They would burn sulfur, aspidity, take tablespoons of castor oil and turpentine, all sorts of different things to help, like not only purge it from being attached to their body, but also to the house as well. So they would wash the floors, the front steps, the back steps, the walls, and sometimes even the ceiling.
Have you ever had to get rid of one?
There was one time when I was younger. A friend was needing, I can't remember, some kind of charm, but it called for graveyard dirt. And of course, I couldn't drive at the time, and my mom was at work. So one of my other friends who was able to drive, they went and got the graveyard dirt, but they forgot, the instructions that I had given them. So they just, grabbed a big handful of graveyard dirt from, just any old grave. And then after that, because Mama always had the doors and windows salted. And the way we salted them, because we had, Lord, how many cats did we have at the time? I think we had 2 or 3 grown cats and then about 9 kittens. So we didn't want them, getting in the windows and, breaking the salt line or anything.
Yeah.
So Mama would always, she would always wait until it was a little bit chilly outside and really warm in the house, so there was good condensation on the windows. And then she would, lay the salt line, and then she would take one of the, what do you call them? It's like those blue dropper things, the big rubber ones. And she would take that, and she would just drip just a little bit of water going along down the line, just enough to moisten the salt, and basically get to solidify to itself as well as to the window pane. So, once it dried, it was essentially, solid as a rock. And then she would, take a razor or something and chip it off anytime that the salt began turning brown or, any color that it wasn't supposed to be except for white. And then she would, relay the line.
Did it get rid of it?
Well, I got rid of it because it started happening not in the house, but outside of the house, because we would always see this old woman with glasses at the tip of her nose, and she would be, beckoning, come here. So finally I just, because the graveyard that my friend went to was way in North Carolina, and I couldn't, get back out there. So I took it out to the woods and gave offerings of, tobacco and cornmeal. And after that, it was done. So, she had just been, disturbed, and she, wasn't understanding why.
Yeah. You talk a lot about that actually in the book about, the giving offerings to spirits or to to the spirits of dead animals and all this, giving the offerings of food or tobacco or any of that. What do you think the significance of that is, or the purpose of that is?
Really, I think I don't really think it, originates in, any certain practice or region or country, because it's exemplified all over the world. So I think it's simply a human, just kind of like a human habit, especially when it comes to venerating the dead, because no matter where you look, offerings are always given to the dead, whether it's fresh fruits, liquors, tobacco, cornmeal, whatever it may be. It's some kind of, basically like a gift from one world to another. Because, nobody wants to be forgotten. Nobody wants to, know that they have been forgotten. And that's also, exemplified in, Mexican culture, where they believe that there's actually 3 deaths. First you die, and then the second time, what is it? It's the first time you die, and the first time you die is when you realize your mortality, that you will one day die. And then the second time you die is when you actually die. But then the third time that you die is when you are last remembered, like the last time that you were ever remembered by the living.
When the last person that remembers you dies, you completely die.
Yeah, when your story is no longer continuing.
Wow.
So yeah, I think it is purely a human characteristic and not necessarily a characteristic of a particular people or place or region.
Yeah. Root magic. How do you define that?
Like root working, correct?
Yeah, root working. Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's I think it's really it really stems from a bunch of the cultures that came here, because the Italians, they used garlic to ward off evil, just like all the other cultures, whether it was Irish or African or even the Cherokee, because the Cherokee used roots and herbs for healing, winning ball games, for love work. So there's always been kind of like this belief that, again, with the doctrine of signatures, that everything contains a certain power, ordained to it by God or by the Great Spirit, depending on who you talk to. That it can have some kind of particular or some kind of particular change in the course of one's life, or changing the events, or even changing the minds of people.
So you do that in a way to affect a change, essentially, and do like these magical rituals using this material.
Yeah, basically. And even with my family, because Jesus healed the blind man with mud and spit, he could have simply used his spit, but he also used mud for some reason. The priests, they cured the lepers with hyssop and I think cedar and a bunch of other herbs. And then there's anointing oil recipes that call for myrrh and frankincense and all sorts of different things. So roots and herbs have always been used for spiritual purposes as well as medicinal purposes. Based on that belief that it can affect some kind of change, whether it's a change in consciousness, a change in the the healing of the body, or simply the healing of the spirit in any kind.
Very interesting stuff, Jake. Man, how did you before we let you go, man, how did you come to write this book? I mean, how did this come about? How have the sales been? How's the response been to this book?
Overall, except for those couple of bad,
right,
ill-informed reviews, it's been really good. The sales have mostly been in the Appalachian region, which is where I was aiming at.
Right.
So hopefully it will help restore that knowledge to the ones that it's been lost from, whether it was where it wasn't handed down, or it's to somebody who wishes now that they would have listened more, to kind of return it back to the people.
All right. Well, that's cool. I'm really looking forward to reading it. Adam's already read it. I did have one last question, though, as like kind of a side note. How was the growth and evolution of modern day evangelical Christianity? Has it impacted some of these old beliefs? Have they, come trying to convert people and get people to leave these old practices and beliefs behind?
Yeah, just like with the local churches who are hardcore and strict by the rules, they do sometimes persuade people to leave behind the superstition. The superstition opens the door to the devil.
Right.
But I think the majority of their reach here is simply through television.
Uh-huh.
Because I don't think if they came here in large groups to try and persuade or convert or do any of that, I think they would be ran out of town, just like the Westboro Baptist Church has been ran out of every
Right.
town here.
Well, that's real interesting, man.
Again, because of that, that spirit of independence and that, that habit with the familiar. Essentially, what I do behind closed doors is between me and God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, if it works, then, there's no point in, abandoning it. And if it's not broken, don't fix it.
Well, it seems like that all this is very integrated. That's the thing. It's like, it's so much based in the Bible and using the Bible as a tool. And it's just it's this part of Christianity that isn't spoken about. This like folk Christian belief that's just not spoken about by the mainstream.
But it's always been there.
Yeah.
But it's always been there.
Yeah. And in our culture where it's so integrated, most of the response that I've had to the book is, I had no idea, or this brings an explanation to what my grandmother did, or my grandfather did, or, what my great uncle did. So, it was just accepted as, the normal weird per se. So it wasn't really, thought of or like, what the hell are they doing? It was just, either a part of the family or, a part of the culture. So it wasn't really questioned, and, no second thought was put to it.
When your grandfather started showing you all this, how old were you?
Well, the only things that he shared with me, because I was real young when he died. I was about 7, maybe. I knew about the the Bible verse and the taking off warts and stopping blood with the Bible verse and stuff. But the rest of it I've kind of gathered on my own, whether from my mother or from my grandmother as I've gotten older.
And you said you just got started like 10 years ago.
Yeah, when I was about, I want to say 10 or 11.
That's really cool how you're chronicling this stuff and preserving it. I just really hand it to you. I think it's a really good job. A lot more people need to do that so that these things can be preserved.
Absolutely. Jake, please tell us, man, where can people find the book, and what's next for you? Or is there another book in the future?
Yeah, they can find the book on, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, usually your local Barnes & Noble, as well as indiebound.com. And yeah, I am currently working on the second book, which will delve further into, the actual people that did this work, into, what degrees of the practice and, everything of that nature.
Nice.
But yeah, they can find it, generally on Amazon and, places like that.
Okay. Well, cool. We're stay on the line for us, Jake. Thank you so much. This has been awesome. Stay on the line for us. We're going to close out this section. And guys, we'll be back out to, as I always say, close out the show on Conspirinormal.
If you want your HR team to hire top talent for your company, tell them about ZipRecruiter. ZipRecruiter's powerful matching technology identifies people with the right skills, education, and experience, and actively invites them to apply to your company's job posts, so you get qualified candidates fast. It's no wonder that ZipRecruiter is rated #1 by employers in the U.S. This rating comes from hiring sites on Trustpilot with over 1,000 reviews. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/Conspirinormal. That's ZipRecruiter.com/Conspirinormal. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire.
Another great interview, man. That was really impressive, dude. I really enjoyed that one. And that's kind of like a personal taste there for us, because we're from this area. Yeah, I'm from East Tennessee, so just kind of barely from East Tennessee. But yeah, I mean, for me, that's just like little things that you see growing up, and you're just like, oh, I wonder what that was. And then you kind of I read his book, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Didn't know that.
Putting it together way later. Well, and he said it's having that effect on a lot of people who had this in their family, didn't really know what it was about, and now they really get to tie it together.
Right, yeah. I mean, he's a wealth of knowledge on this stuff, and the dude's young. He's like, what did you say? He was 22?
Yeah, something like that.
And already written a book?
Yeah.
We're slacking.
Yeah, we're bullshitting.
That's what's going on. Just a few thoughts that I had, man, that had to do with this interview and the previous interview with Alan Stievelman, which we actually did both on the same day. So it's all really fresh in my mind. But I thought there were some interesting parallels, and I talked to Jake about this a little bit, and we may hear that in like the Patreon part that we'll put up, the very short Patreon part that we did. But there's some parallels between this and like what Alan was telling us about Juan Perez and his experience and him getting in touch with the ancestors, the Guarani. And Jake says that he got started right like when he was about 10 or 11. Alan tells us that Juan has this experience that he had in Argentina at 12.
Yeah.
So learning these different things and getting back in touch with the ancestors and being a part of a community and the shamanic experience, it all kind of fits in together.
Yeah.
And also having these weird, whether it's ghosts or UFOs or whatever, or what have you, these weird experiences are an essential part of all this.
Yeah. Well, it's what people have always done. I mean,
Right.
We're the exception now. You know, people who don't do this are the exception.
Right. There was a couple other things too that Jake mentioned that I thought were fascinating. And this idea that our good friend Josh Cutchin talks about, the idea of the links between fairy lore and the dead.
Yeah.
Well, you've got dogs symbolizing death, Luna moths symbolizing death. What was it? Like owls symbolize death. All these are creatures that you're seeing coming up in these cryptid sightings too, right? I mean, Mike Clelland's owl stuff, that material, the screen memories, quote unquote Mothman, Dog Man.
Yeah.
You know, all these things that are just in this liminal space, and these creatures that are not physically real, and then this association with death and with fairy lore and the dead, and what, you know, Alan told us about, you know, Juan Perez having this experience and then his grandfather showing up in the middle of it, which is a common motif in contact experiences.
Yeah.
That's a huge connection to me. Because that, I think this interview and the interview that we did before in the last episode really in some ways came together. Am I making any sense?
Yeah, yeah.
On what
This all
means?
revolves around the other world, and all of these phenomenons revolve around the other world and around the, you know, transfer from life to death.
Right. And
Which is the great, you know, that is the ultimate other.
Yeah. And Josh has told me before that maybe we're just dealing with like one huge ghost story.
Yeah, why not?
That's what it is. Yeah, it's just all this is just a contact from another world, another realm.
And maybe from where we all go.
Yeah. I think next time we're going to have a roundtable with a few guests. And when we get to that, I think I'm going to throw out that question to those guys, see what they can run with and what they can do with that, because I want to kind of like formulate this a little more in my head about what all that means. But yeah, man, fascinating stuff.
Absolutely. That was really cool.
Jake, I think, has a lot more stories than he's telling us.
Oh yeah.
And to be in so much touch with this at such a young age, and to be considered, you know, basically the dude's a shaman.
Yeah, he's a professional.
Yeah, he's a professional at it. He, you know, this is what he does. He's written, like I said, he's written a book about it, you know, and we invited him to Strange Realities 2020 officially. So we'll see if that comes about. But yeah, pretty impressed, man. Anything else that we want to add about this interview? Any impressions that you had in particular?
No, it was just really interesting to see someone so young really realizing how important it is to chronicle and preserve all these traditions, and hopefully we're going to be seeing more of that. I think a lot of that might be going on with this kind of resurgence and interest in folk magic.
I think so. One of the things that I went to as we were trying to do the flyers for the Strange Realities conference was I went to this folk magic festival. It was put on by this place. I'll give them a shout out because they're good people. By this place here in Nashville called Aromagy. And they're basically kind of like this one of these shops that are springing up everywhere, where they have all these statues of saints, botanica, different religious traditions, scented, magical candles and stuff, like some of the stuff that you got over here, Mr. Easy Street. They've got that kind of material there, and it's also a bookstore with a lot of stuff from a lot of different kind of either new age or occult traditions and such and such. And I went to this thing, and Heather actually joined me there for a little bit, and I just asked her, I was just like, so many of the people here are women. Yeah. Like, women are very, very fascinated by this.
Yeah, we've been talking about that.
Yeah, and it's like, and I was like, is this a new aspect of feminism? What is this? And I just think it's just like, people getting in touch with their roots, getting in touch with what they've with what they see as their, trying to get back into touch with their past or their culture.
Just trying to ground themselves.
Yeah, trying to ground themselves in something.
As the world gets more and more, crazy, more and more further away from the roots and spirituality, and more materialist and technological. I think it's a similar type of spiritual crisis like what we had with the Industrial Revolution.
Yes. Yep. And it's become more and more, and people are more and more isolated from each other, I think, because of the internet.
Yeah.
It hasn't really been something that's brought us together very much. But I did get into this conversation, with this lady there, and we talked for a little bit, talked about herself as a Christian, but still wanting to practice this ancient form of folkloric magic, essentially. And there's that kind of like cognitive dissonance there, but it's like all this stuff is just kind of integrated.
Well, but think about how old it all is, and a non-syncretic Christianity is really is probably a lot more of a modern invention, than what was the norm for a long time.
Exactly. In the past I've been pretty critical of syncretism. But, now you see that just like this, syncretism almost has become a necessity, because you just can't, there's no way that you could really.
Well, and especially.
Most of the time people were forced at like the point of a sword to convert, or because the ruler converted. And so you just said, okay, you're Christian now. But those beliefs never went away.
Yeah.
They're still around.
Well, and especially because of, just the fact of the origins of a lot of these like Middle Eastern Abrahamic religions were pretty abstract to a lot of, they were abstract to a lot of Europeans, I'm sure. And then they're very abstract as the Europeans spread it around the world. So, there has to be some local material to try to integrate it with.
Right. And, pagan, that has that kind of connotation because of the idea of witchcraft, or even like you would get into like heavy metal or pagan, man, I'm pagan. But it's like all pagan meant in the ancient world was the common people or farmers.
More, rural.
That's
people,
what it meant.
Peasants.
That's exactly what it meant, because those are people that practice these old ideas, these old folkloric magic, quote unquote witchcraft. All these things were practiced in the ancient world, and then Christianity comes in and says, okay, well, you're Christian now. But those people they kept all that. All that has been kept, and then Christianity kind of started having this veneer on top of that. So this is where you get these traditions like powwow, for instance, that is actually steeped in kind of Catholicism. And then what the stuff we just talked about with Jake, how the Bible is used as a divining rod. And you got to remember too, like the Bible, essentially, that's all people had. Maybe you had like the books of Shakespeare, but the one book in the house for most people for quite a few centuries in this country and in Europe was the Bible.
I thought that's it.
Especially
fascinating tonight.
Yeah.
The Bible magic stuff.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot to that for sure. And just like you coming up with all the different, you got to open it and spin around, and where you land is where it tells you where it is.
The placement of pictures, and that's really fascinating.
But like I said, that's also a tradition that I've known because of my exposure to Brazilians too. Like that's something they do. So that's a thing in not just in North America and our tradition, but in other countries as well. So this stuff is old, and it doesn't go away, and I don't think it's anything to be fearful of necessarily. It just kind of is there, and it's always going to be there. Like I said, it's never gonna go away. Yeah. So, but those are kind of the thoughts that I had on it. All right. I think that's it, man. I think we're going to close it. Sergio, tell everybody where they can find our Patreon if they want to join up and be part of our little cult we got going on.
Right, and it looks like there's going to be a lot of material on the Patreon coming up. There may be some opportunities to be exposed to some of the recordings from Strange Realities if you didn't get to make it, or if you did make it and you want to relive some of that and listen to some of the lectures again. So it's definitely a great time to become a patron. Go to patreon.com/Conspirinormal or make a one-time donation on Conspirinormal.com. Conspirinormal.com is a good place to go to access the new episodes, get a little rundown, little blogs on what's going on with the episodes, and we're going to be trying to share more information on there as well.
Okay, and also don't forget, guys, Conspirinormal Podcast on YouTube. You can find that there. Please give us a subscription so we can get to 1,000. So we don't know. This was 2 weeks from the day we're recording it. So maybe we'll get to there by then. I can only hope.
And then you can help us pray to the algorithmic lords.
That's right. Yeah, to our AI overlords. And also leave a good review on iTunes. That really helps us out as well. Leave us a nice 5-star review. You can't do a 6. I know it's disappointing. But, okay. Well, that's it, guys. We will be back next time. We're going to do another roundtable on Conspirinormal.
Consider becoming a Patreon at www.patreon.com/Conspirinormal or leave a one-time donation at Conspirinormal.com. And please check out our YouTube channel, Conspirinormal Podcast.